Hey there, it's Tim Viegas. This is Think Inclusive. How do you feel about going around barefoot? All the time. If you were to ask me 8 months ago, I would have said, I don't think I could do it. Now I feel differently. And our guest this week knows something about going barefoot. He was inspired to ditch the shoes after participating in the Barefoot Autism Challenge. Learn more right after a short break. Welcome back to Think Inclusive, where every week we bring you conversations about inclusive education and what inclusion looks like in the real world. This week, we are talking about running and walking. Now, what does this have to do with inclusion? Well, our guest, Ken Posner, is an experienced runner with 106 marathon and ultras completed, including record-setting runs on the 350-mile long path and for the 292-mile Badwater Double. He lives in New York's Hudson Valley and works in corporate planning for one of the nation's leading mortgage servicers. He is a passionate advocate for the therapeutic benefits of natural stimulation and mindfulness, particularly through the practice of going barefoot, as he did with the Barefoot Autism Challenge. Although he's not a professional runner, Ken's got a fervor for barefoot running, and the energy and the joy that it offers has led him to adopt it as a lifestyle choice. With an awareness of neurodiversity and its intersections with physical activities, he champions the experience of going barefoot for both neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals, emphasizing the grounding and process-enhancing aspects it offers. Before we get to the interview, I want to tell you about Bookshare. Are your students reading below grade level? Do they struggle to read due to a learning difference like dyslexia, visual impairments, or physical disabilities? Bookshare is a free ebook library that makes reading and learning easier. Designed for students with learning differences, Bookshare lets students read in ways that work for them with ebooks in easy-to-read formats. Students can access millions of titles, including textbooks, educational materials, and popular titles like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. Students read with free reading tools on the devices that they have access to at home or school. They can listen to words read aloud, follow along with highlighted text, read in large font or braille, and customize their reading experience. Bookshare is 100% free for all U.S. students with qualifying disabilities and schools through funding from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Sign up today at Bookshare.org. That's Bookshare.org. And now, my interview with Ken Posner. And for free time this week, I'm taking you to the trailer park. Ken Posner, welcome to the Think Inclusive podcast.
Thank you, Tim. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Ken, you brought to my attention something called the Autism Barefoot Challenge. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? And let's start there.
Sure, Tim. The Barefoot Autism Challenge is the idea of a fellow named Tyler Leach, who lives in Iowa, and he is an individual with autism. And he observed that in many cases, autistic people, including himself, enjoy going barefoot and prefer to go barefoot. And it's for the natural stimulation and the sense of grounding. It helps them process information about their environment and feel more confident. So the challenge is very simple. It's just the idea that you would go somewhere barefoot for the experience and then post a picture or a video on the Facebook page. And by doing that, show support and advocacy for the autistic community, because you're both experiencing something that's important or maybe important to them. And you're also showing other people, hey, I'm going to do something that's a little different, but I'm going to do it because it matters to this group of people who prefer to be barefoot.
And is going barefoot something that you do normally?
Now it is, but it wasn't before the challenge. Now Tim, I had started a little bit of barefoot running a few years ago, just to improve my form. It's something that obviously Chris McDougall wrote the bestseller Born to Run, advocating for that, and some coaches recommend it. And I thought to myself, as a runner, I should do a little bit of barefoot running just to ensure that my form is good. But then it was so much fun that over time, I lost interest in running in shoes and started hiking barefoot. But I always thought of barefoot as, an athletic endeavor, like, running or hiking. And then when I heard about the challenge and Tyler Leach's idea, I was like, I could just walk somewhere. I could go to the grocery store or a coffee shop, right? And so once I started doing that for the challenge, I realized that Tyler was absolutely right. Just going barefoot anywhere, you don't have to run, you don't have to hike. It's not necessarily about cardio benefits, but the natural stimulation of just feeling the ground is incredibly, grounding. Mm-hmm. So now I go barefoot everywhere, unless shoes are required and or it's not safe due to cold or hot temperatures.
Right. When I've floated this idea before, so Ken and I have had a conversation before this conversation that's been being recorded, about barefoot running and about just going around barefoot. And I think I was telling someone about our conversation and they were like, well, doesn't that hurt? Doesn't like, that's usually, I don't know if when you tell people that you go around barefoot, like what the common response is, but I would imagine to be like, oh, like I could never do that, or, that would hurt too much or something like that.
So, it's interesting, Tim. The responses are all over the map. Now, there's a lot of people who have the same reaction that I have, because I remember, and this may have been 10 or 12 years ago, I was just running in the park in shoes, and I saw a man and his daughter running barefoot. And I was like, wow, it made an impression on me, because I thought that, wow, that's so natural. And they look so self-reliant and so relaxed and confident being themselves. I just thought it was really cool. So I would say most of the time when I'm out on the trails or running, people think it's cool because it's natural. Natural is cool. And so generally I get positive feedback. Now, some people are startled and, they've been told you have to wear supportive running shoes. You have to wear hiking boots. They see somebody without, and they have no understanding that, in days gone by, everybody went barefoot before shoes were, widely available.
Right.
So they freak out a little bit. And I get comments sometimes like, well, I couldn't even go barefoot in my bathroom. And my response is, that's not good, but I don't say anything. But then there's a third category too, Tim. Some people get really triggered. And I'm not sure exactly why. I was in a coffee shop in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and the proprietor came out, and he was just so angry and so rude and confrontational. I promise I'll never go back to that coffee shop again. But I don't know what, I guess he must have a sense that, good people wear shoes, and anybody who's not doing that is a troublemaker. So I felt like, I'm not exactly a teenager anyhow, but I imagine that's how, he would yell at some teenager he didn't like coming into his coffee shop. So that's the range of reactions. And because, Barefoot's unusual in today's world, you are going to generate some reactions from people.
So I have more questions, but I also am aware that some people are probably wondering, like, why are you talking to this guy, Ken?
That's a fair question.
So, and the reason why is, Ken actually emailed me and said, "Hey, I've got some really cool information about this Autism Barefoot Challenge." And so as sometimes I have like conversations before booking a guest, and I was just so enthralled by the information that Ken had to offer. Ken, it's not like you're a professional runner, or it's not like, this is your job. You have a day job, but it was just so fascinating to me and such a really interesting conversation. And anyone who's listened to me for, I don't know, however many years knows that I run. And that's an interesting, that's interesting to me. But I wanted to bring Ken on because I think you have a really interesting perspective about running and about how it's connected to neurodiversity. So I just want to, tell people and be like, this isn't Tim's typical guest, but I think that it really does fit in with what we're trying to do, which is have people really think differently about people who are different, right? And more, have this more acceptance and open our minds and our world to maybe something that is a little bit different. And walking barefoot's different, as you were talking about, this coffee shop thing, I would imagine that somebody is like, well, that's just not sanitary. That's what I've heard, like if you walk around barefoot, like in a dirty hotel room or like in a dirty, sidewalk or whatever, that somehow it's not healthy for you to walk around barefoot. Have you ever heard that?
Well, for sure. And nobody's ever told that to me, but I've read articles and things where people raise concerns. And, it's interesting, Tim, sanitation and hygiene are really important. And it made our world a much better place, but you can overdo things too. So, the question is, from a hygiene perspective, if you're walking around barefoot, you could be tracking dirt, but so are people in shoes, right? So in terms of tracking dirt, there's no difference. And then, if you get dirty, you can wash them. So, I think it's hard for me to understand what would be the risk. Now you've got to pay attention, and you are taking, responsibility on yourself. The hazards that I'm concerned about are, would be heat or cold or, the dreaded broken glass. But, part of the practice of going barefoot is paying attention. And when you pay attention, you don't step on things that you shouldn't.
Right. Exactly. So I briefly mentioned neurodiversity, in our conversation. I'm wondering, from your perspective, like, what does walking barefoot have to do with neurodiversity?
Well, Tim, at the first level, it may not have anything to do with neurodiversity because, back in the day, pretty much everybody went barefoot, whether they were neurotypical or neurodiverse, because shoes, they may have been invented. People may have had moccasins and sandals, but maybe not everybody had them. But what I think is interesting in this case is the fact that Tyler Leach, who's an individual with autism, raised his hand and said, hey, natural stimulation is important to me. And what his point is that autistic people sometimes process information or process sensations differently from other people, and therefore they may be struggling to get more stimulation or less stimulation. But the natural stimulation of just going barefoot is helpful to him. And Tim, by the way, the reason I reached out to you and to some others is when I participated in the Barefoot Autism Challenge, I realized that Tyler was right, and he had a very powerful statement to make here. So that coming back to your question, the point I'd make is neurotypical people have an easier time fitting in, right? Because they're typical, right? They're they're more the same as everybody else. And that's fine. But I think one of the elements of human life is that people can become so desirous of fitting in that they become very, very conformist. And I consider myself to be more of an independent person, and I'm less enamored of conformism, particularly when it doesn't make sense. So, for example, the requirement to wear shoes, fine on a construction site, but it doesn't really matter anywhere else. And so the conformism can turn very hateful. And I think it may be easier for people who are, in some cases, neurodivergent. Maybe they can't fit in, right? Because they are in some ways, so obviously different from other people. And so maybe because they can't fit in, they don't try as hard. They're not as determined to be that perfect, typical person. Mm-hmm. And that gives them a little bit of freedom to say, hey, you know what, since I'm not trying to be the same as everybody else, I'm going to point out something that you guys are missing. So I think, from when I talk to people, I understand that barefoot is, in many cases, something that's popular among different neurodivergent groups of people. And I think they may have just rediscovered, a truth, which is as humans, we're animals, we need natural stimulation. And barefoot is a great free way to get some of that stimulation that neurotypical people in a very conformist mindset are no longer, in many cases willing to even, consider, which is a shame.
Yeah, I like the fact that barefoot, it seems to be a little bit, it's like definitely counter culture. Because the vast majority of us
used to do.
Yeah. We, if you go anywhere, people are wearing shoes, and if you walk around barefoot, you're going to stand out. And I think that anything that helps us maybe accept or understand somebody that's different, anything that helps us do that better, I think is a good thing. And so yeah, I, applaud you for, walking around barefoot, and also for Tyler, and letting us know that that's something that's important, to them. And then also just, this idea of maybe feeling your world a little bit differently. I think that that's something worthy to explore as well.
Oh, for sure. I feel very strongly about that. And this is, I guess, the link between running and barefoot. And I worry a little bit about the direction of the world. I worry that people will retreat from the natural world, and you end up retreating into the quote unquote matrix, right? The digital world. And I don't know. And the question is, will we, retain our humanity if we are just digital creatures? And I don't know the answer to that. And I guess we'll all find out in due course. But yeah, whether you just walk around barefoot or whether you go running, you're engaging with your world. And it's what I call the full mind-body engagement. I have a huge hunger for natural stimulation and full mind-body engagement. And that's why I love running. And that's why to me, barefoot is like free energy. And because it's just so much fun to pad along on the different surfaces, and you sort of focus on what you're doing because you have to pay attention and the surfaces change. To me, that's, a little extra free happiness that is energy that I can use, for the other things I have to do. So I feel very strongly about that. And again, back to the people who are like, I can't even go barefoot in my living room. I'm like, that's a shame. You're missing out.
Yeah. Well, you're a runner. I would consider myself a runner. Let's talk about running for a little bit. What is it about running? You kind of have explained a little bit, but have you always been a runner? Did you run in high school, college? Were you on track? How did you start running?
Well, I started in high school, but I used to do fencing. That was my sport in high school. And the coach said, Ken, you ought to do some running just to, improve your cardiovascular fitness because, a long fencing match can be tired, you get out of breath. So I started doing a little bit of running, but initially I had really bad chronic shin splints, Tim. And eventually I went through and I got surgery to help with the shin splints. I think today people understand, back to barefoot, that the newfangled running shoes with the big squishy soles and the big heels, for some people, those can trigger the shin splints. And so more of a zero drop or a barefoot style shoe can alleviate those shin splints without the need for surgery. But even so, I got the surgery. It helped. Somehow I got through the Army. That was before the surgery. And it was in the Army that I developed, a real appreciation for endurance because we did road marches, we did long runs. And I felt that, as hard as they were, afterwards, I had a sense that, I went out and did something and earned the right to relax afterwards. So I didn't really turn into a serious runner until I turned 40. I remembered when I was a kid, I went to a karate camp and somebody pointed at a fellow with hushed voice and on their voice. And they said, that man just turned 40. And for his 40th birthday, he ran 40 miles. And we were like, oh, we didn't even know. We had never heard of anything like that. We didn't think it was possible. So I forgot about that until I was 39 and a half. I woke up one day and I was like, uh-oh, I have to go run 40 miles. And I didn't actually do it until I was like 42. And that's when I got into ultra running. And so for the next 20 years, I guess, I've done a lot of long distance running. And I just love it. I mean, it's a huge source of energy for me and passion in my life. As I get a little bit older, we were talking about driving and hips and knees. And yeah, as you get older, you got to be even more careful about that stuff. But running, is a very important part of my life for sure. I
was never an official runner. I was never on track. I played basketball in high school, and in college, I just ran for fun. So, and I went to college in the late 90s, and so there weren't like iPods or anything like that. So, I would just grab my shoes, and they weren't running shoes. Like, I think at one point I was wearing like Sambas, like Adidas Sambas. They weren't really meant for, quote unquote, well, I had thought, of like, the running shoe or whatever. And I would just run off and take out. And honestly, I wouldn't even know how long I ran. I was just like, I'm running for X amount of minutes. There weren't any smartwatches or, fitness trackers. I mean, like, I think I ran 4 miles. I don't know exactly. I actually remember taking my car and like doing like the odometer and checking how far my route was. Just so
I've done that. Yep, I remember doing that back in the day.
But I just remember it was something that was meditative for me, and I really enjoyed the long distances. And it wasn't really about how fast I could run 4 or 5 miles. It was just like that I did it. And at the end, like you said, you felt like you did something, like I ran 5 miles today, and it feels really, really good, So yeah, I don't know if
I agree. Yeah, 1,000% on that. By the way, I ran my first marathon just because I started training for it because I thought it would make me a better person. Now, I was, 25 years old. I had no idea what I meant by that, but I think it does, because it teaches you self-management. Because running requires, it doesn't have to be hard, but it requires that little extra effort. And effort is always going to have a sensation of discomfort, because that's how your body keeps you from, running yourself to pieces. And so you have to manage yourself. You have to pace yourself, hydration, nutrition, paying attention to joints and muscles. So that ability to manage yourself, and if you start doing longer runs or races or whatever, you can have, stressful, difficult environments. And the ability to manage yourself through a difficult environment is the key to being, the operator of your own mission, right?
Right.
And I would add too, the reason I kept running, it's so self-empowering, because if you do a 4-mile run, or if you do a 100-mile run, whatever it is, you get to the end of it and you say, I did it. And that's really the runner's high. People talk about endorphins and dopamine and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't really matter. And sometimes during a run, you have, a feeling of flowing, which is nice. And sometimes during a run, you have a feeling of just heat and pain and being out of breath and not being fun. But the real runner's high is when you get to the end and you say, it may not have been graceful. It may not have been as fast as I wanted, but I did it. I moved myself from point A to point B. I'm in charge of myself. I can manage myself. And that's the real runner's high. And when it's part of your life, the runner's high extends throughout your life and gives you that energy and joy and confidence that just helps you do more than maybe you would have otherwise.
There's I often make this comparison to marathon or like long distance running to the inclusion journey, especially for individuals, teachers, school systems, because there's a sense that in school systems, especially ones that we work with MCIE, that we want things to change rapidly. We want things to change quickly because there's a sense of urgency of we have learners with disabilities who, should be included, accepted, have a sense of belonging in these schools, and we want it to change overnight. But it's just not possible. You can't do that. It's a journey. It's a marathon. It's something that you have to train for. And not only that, but when you have gone through it, there's a sense of accomplishment and a sense of that we've done the right thing. And it kind of it self-reinforces, in the systems that we've worked with for years, and they've been able to sustain the work. It's because they see that it's working and they see that
Right.
there's benefits, right? So, I just wanted to connect that too for our audience, that, yeah, Ken and I are talking about running and, we're talking about the benefits and stuff like that. But there's a lot of things in life that, when you put in the effort and you put in the work and you get to the other side of it, maybe you're not even done, but you get that sense of accomplishment and sense of that you've done something, really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, Tim, you bring up, the connection. And I'm a big believer that running is not something you go out and do and then forget about it. It's part of your life. And it's part about training yourself to be a better person and so that you can make the world a better place. And so you draw the link to the organizational situation where, you'd like to, organizations have missions and life is always complicated. I have a corporate job. I serve on a couple boards for not-for-profits. And, but I think what another aspect of running that's helpful is it teaches, what a lot of us call mindfulness. And if you're going to do a long run, by the way, Pam Reed is a famous ultra runner, and she just ran the Badwater race, Hard Rock in Western States, which are 300-mile races. Badwater is 135 miles. So she did it in 3 weeks. And she's not young anymore. So that's an incredible accomplishment. She's one of the most distinguished ultra runners in recent history. But she has a saying. She says, when I set out to run a 100-mile race, I don't run a 100-mile race. I run a 1-mile race 100 times. So what she's saying is break the impossible, mind-blowing goal down into small pieces and just focus on one piece at a time. So that's mindfulness. It's being in the moment. I was at the track the other day here in Dallas. It was 106 degrees and I was trying to do intervals. So I just, focused on one lap at a time and sometimes just little parts of the lap. But back to, schools and organizations, I think that's the right attitude. You can't change an organization overnight. As I said, I'm on a board of an organization and we're struggling with the DEI question. And we're not going to change anything overnight. That's for sure. But we could take a step forward, right? And so let's focus on just one step. So the board is next week probably going to form a DEI committee to do more work. And that's a first step, right? So one step at a time. That's what you learn running or hiking or walking. And, I feel like life, you can take one step a little bit to the left, or you could take one step a little bit to the right. And that's it. That's life. And then repeat, hopefully, for many steps. So I think that's part of the connection between the philosophy of running or the mindset of running and how we try to make progress with these tough issues in society.
So Ken, we talked a lot about running and we talked a lot about, both of our experiences. But I want to bring us back to, why you think it's important for us to learn from people, who think differently, who are different than maybe, the typical or the mainstream.
Well, sure, Tim. And I've got some very pragmatic answers. Sometimes, I'm talking with people and we have the same point of view. Well, it's boring, right? Because we agree on everything. And it's nice when you find people who share values and thoughts, but you're not learning anything new. And so we need to have a diversity of views, right? The Yale scholar Irving Janis wrote about groupthink. That's when everybody sits around and says, yes, we all think that's right. And if they're wrong, then everybody gets surprised and an individual and organization fails or suffers a disappointment or a failure that maybe somebody would have recognized otherwise. So I think that's one reason. And I'll go back, and mention again Tyler Leach's Barefoot Autism Challenge. Here's somebody who is a little bit different from the neurotypical person, and he raises his hand and says, "Hey, barefoot provides natural stimulation. It's fun. I enjoy it. It helps me process my surroundings." And that should be true for everybody. But a lot of folks, being of a more conformist mindset, have lost that idea. So somebody who's a little different reminds us of something that we're at risk of missing. I've also, there's another pragmatic reason. And, this is why I think most modern companies support diversity is they want the best people. They want productive people. If you can help somebody access a facility, maybe they're in a wheelchair, but they might be able to make incredible contributions once they are able to be in the facility. So that's another common sense, pragmatic reason. But I'll add one more. I mean, I served for a very brief period in the Army many years ago, but, I remember a little bit of the ethos, and we've all heard this: leave no man behind, or leave no person behind. And so, in today's world, we're very generally, on average, very prosperous. And if somebody is struggling, let's reach out a hand and help them and not leave them behind. So, those are the reasons that I think of.
Yeah, those are really great points, and also very pragmatic. We're humans, so we really should be looking out for each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. We do have a lot of people who listen who are educators. So it's like, classroom teachers, principals, school leaders, thinking about who's listening, what would you want them to take away from our conversation?
Well, first of all, I've benefited from great educators, and during, when I was in school, and I'm not an educator, so I wouldn't be presumptuous and try to tell people what they should do. But the thought I would leave folks with is what we had talked a little bit about before, Tim. It's this idea of the full mind-body engagement. And so much education today is focused on skills, STEM or whatever it might be, and that's important. But I think we take a risk if we focus entirely on the mind and leave the body behind. And, this is something that, for example, JFK made this point back in the 1960s. He said, physical fitness is important to creating the moral strength that we need to do the right things. And look, you could agree with that or not agree with that, but I think the full mind-body engagement and for I've talked with educators when I participate in the Barefoot Autism Challenge, I'll typically wear a little button so people know what I'm doing. And I've talked to teachers and therapists and others, and for some levels of autistic kids who have the more challenging issues, it would be hard, I think, to take them to a track. I don't know how to do that, but I think that's got to be important for them. I think it's got to be important for all kids, at least giving them that exposure. And so I worry a little bit, as schools face budget pressures that, and as our culture becomes more sedentary, I worry a little bit about that. And so I think that's the message, for me, for what it's worth. The running or going barefoot is about the natural stimulation. It's about engaging with your world. And I'm hopeful that, that's helpful to other people the way it has been to me.
Don't miss the mystery question right after this break. So if you could be a personal assistant to anyone, who would it be? If you could be a personal assistant
Anybody
to anyone, anybody. I don't know about you, but I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to various kinds, news podcasts, politics podcasts, podcasts on faith and spirituality, podcasts on sports, all different kinds of podcasts. But one of my favorite podcasters is Malcolm Gladwell. And
sure.
So he's an author. He's written a number of books. And Pushkin is his podcast company, and it's kind of like a secret dream of mine that I would love to be affiliated with Pushkin. It was just like, that'd be amazing, right? To work on one of his narrative podcasts. So I would be Malcolm Gladwell's personal assistant in a heartbeat.
Interesting. Yeah, I've read a couple of his books and enjoyed them. Okay, well, here's somebody. This is the best I can do on the spot. I just read a book by a fellow named Tom Satterley, and Tom was a command sergeant major in Delta Force for many years. And retired eventually. He fought in the Battle of Mogadishu and was deployed to Iraq. So a fellow who saw a lot of very difficult, dangerous duty. And after he retired, he struggled with what he calls PTS, post-traumatic stress. He doesn't use the word disorder because he thinks it's natural if you're exposed to that kind of stress to have these kinds of issues. And in his after service work, he's working with other veterans to help them deal with, all the challenges that come with that, including substance addiction and alcohol. And so he now runs a foundation. So I think it would be really interesting. I don't know what his day-to-day life is like and what it would be like to be his personal assistant, but he's got, the military mindset, the special operators, incredible dedication to training and performance. But he's also realized there's more to life than just being, a fighter, and that you've got to deal with these other issues. And he's out, telling his story. He's got a great book. He's, I'm sure, involved in lots of other, podcasts and interviews, and I think he's testified before Congress. So I think I would learn a lot from hanging around with him for a little bit.
Ken Posner, thank you so much for being on the Think Inclusive podcast. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.
That chime means it's free time. Now, some of you know that I have another podcast called Trailer Park that I co-host with Ariel Nissenblatt. And on that podcast, we play podcast trailers, usually 1 to 2 minute previews of a current or upcoming podcast. And so this week, I wanted to share a trailer from a friend of mine, Amanda Morin. She's got a new podcast called The Empathetic Edge. Let's hit play on that trailer, and I'll meet you on the other side.
Tally, are you a good boss?
Well, if you mean somebody who's always looking over your shoulder, micromanaging you, constantly looking for something that may not be going right with their employees, then no, I would tell you I'm not a good boss. But if you are thinking that a boss right now should be open and transparent and real in who they are authentically, then I think I'm doing a pretty good job right now. So what about you, Amanda? Are you a good boss?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think the people who work for me and I pay on a regular basis think so. But most days I'm just trying my best to be understanding and paying attention and thinking through how we can all work together. So I think I'm a pretty good boss. And then there are days where I don't do it well and I have to come back to it and try again.
Yeah.
So, Tally, you and I have been talking about what makes a good leader, what's working and not working in the workplace for a really long time. And now we want to bring the conversation to you, listeners.
So get ready for The Empathetic Edge, a new podcast launching next week. It's a podcast about empathetic and intentional leadership.
So who are we and why should you listen to us?
I'm Tally Dolge, and I am a self-proclaimed highly anxious leader. I've been a CEO, I've been a consultant, I've been an executive, and I have been talking to leaders for as long as I can remember.
And I'm Amanda Morin, and I've been a leader for over a decade, and I've come to learn that my superpower is empathy. And I even wrote a book about it.
Join us this season as we talk to people across the workplace spectrum about everything from jargon and plain language to how to bridge generational divides as the workplace gets both older and younger.
Subscribe now to The Empathetic Edge wherever you get your podcasts. And we promise we'll never ask you to circle back, put a pin in it, or put this podcast in the parking lot.
Folks, this one is going to be great. And I think particularly if you work in the school setting, you are going to find some great insights about building community. So find The Empathetic Edge wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it for this episode of Think Inclusive. If you are ready to move forward with inclusive educational practices in your school or district, come and partner with us. Our work begins with a conversation, so reach out on our website, mcie.org. Let's talk. Think Inclusive is written, edited, sound designed, mixed, and mastered by me, Tim Villegas, and is a production of the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. Original music by Miles Creditch. Additional music from Melody. This episode has been sponsored by Bookshare, which is completely free, so check it out at bookshare.org. Thanks for your time and attention, and remember, inclusion always works. So Ken, this isn't necessarily going to be part of the podcast episode, but I wanted to tell you that I think our first conversation, which is a few months ago, has really inspired me to try barefoot running. And
oh wow,
yeah. So just a little bit about that, and then we can get into it. I don't know if I remember. I don't remember what I told you about my running, but I've been having some issues with my knee and hip flexors just being really tight, and hamstrings and all this stuff. And running was not enjoyable. And I was having a really hard time. And we went on this road trip, my family and I. And just all the driving and stuff, it was my back and my hips and my knees and my feet were not happy with me, just absolutely not happy with me. So when we got back, I think I had rented, because you had suggested Born to Run, I think, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So I read Born to Run. I more or less skimmed it because I bought the book, but I kind of was like going through it, and I'm like, oh, then Eric Orton, the Cool Impossible. I bought that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. This is wonderful. I'm like, I wonder if this could really help, all of the issues that I've been having. And so I talked to my wife, and I'm like, hey, listen, I want to get some zero drop shoes. I want to try going through some of the stuff in this book. What do you think? And she's like, okay, I support you. You go ahead, get your shoes, and, get the equipment and stuff like that. So over the last month or so, I had gone like completely barefoot as much as possible. I'm starting to do real short runs in zero drop shoes, and, changing completely how I run. And I'm already seeing like really, really great benefits. And it's like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, don't do too much running too soon, because your body's got to adjust.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting, Tim. I can't wait to hear more. But the one danger with Born to Run is it's about barefoot running.
Right.
But running is the more impactful way to get going, and your body has to, small differences in angles and form can cause tendons and other parts of your body to need to adjust. The secret is it's much easier to start with barefoot hiking.
Oh, yeah.
And even easier than barefoot hiking is just walking around, which it sounds like you're doing.
Yes.
And the risk is it's so much fun that you can go overboard. And I'm somebody who likes to go overboard, or ends up going overboard. So here's the next book you should read, which is Barefoot Running Step by Step by Ken Bob Saxton.
Okay.
Ken Bob is the real guru of barefoot running. And he'll give you some good tips, like avoid, be careful not to exaggerate your forefoot landing. You don't want to strain your calves.
Right, exactly. Okay, cool. Well, anyways, so there was a number of things that kind of happened that pushed me towards this new style of running, but I just wanted to let you know that definitely our conversation inspired some change. So I don't know, that's pretty cool, I think.
I'm delighted. I want to hear more as time goes by and you go further on this journey. I'm fascinated.
For sure. All right. Well, let's jump into the conversation
from MCIE.